also people that are like, I don't believe in the system and I don't know if I believe that my vote even matters. I don't feel like they feel that confident about like the voting process.
A lot of individuals were attacked for doing their civic duty of actually working polls and make sure people could vote.
David Becker is the executive director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research. He's also co-author of The Big Truth, Upholding Democracy in the Age of the Big Lie. David Becker joins us now live to discuss all of this. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Veronica.
So, David, let's talk about the current political climate for elections in general right now. How healthy would you say our election system is overall?
So I think there are two separate things we need to be acknowledged here. One is that the actual election system is remarkably healthy. We've never had more secure, transparent, and verifiable elections in American history. The 2020 election was one of the greatest successes of the American democratic process we've ever seen, with record turnout and verified results that were confirmed over and over and over again in the middle of a global pandemic. But despite that, we're seeing the second thing, which is that there has been an attack on those processes by candidates who lost. And that has led to 2 years of abuse and harassment and threats directed at the professionals, the men and women who run elections in our country, the public servants we rely upon to facilitate our democracy. And that has taken its toll to some degree and led many of them to experience some of their voters who've been fed a constant diet of lies, questioning the process.
So, David, President Biden addressed the nation last night, and he talked about protecting democracy. Let's go ahead and take a listen to this.
You know, American democracy is under attack because the defeated former president of the United States refuses to accept the results of the 2020 election. He refuses to accept the will of the people. He refuses to accept the fact that he lost.
Now, to your point, David, this comes before an election where more than 300 candidates don't accept the legitimacy of the 2020 election. So how dangerous of a time are we in right now? And will this major divide in parties drive election officials and poll workers away, especially when the labor market is tight in general?
Yeah, we are seeing a lot of election officials, an unprecedented number of election officials leaving. I think we still have to see if there are poll workers who've decided that they can't continue in this job. What I'm inspired by, though, is the vast majority of election officials who have worked through this, who have just kept going, who are giving voice to all of their voters, regardless of political party, and the poll workers, many of them new poll workers, who volunteered to help their neighborhoods, their fellow citizens express their voice in our democracy, again, regardless of who they're going to vote for. I will say I'm not very worried at all about the actual process. I think we're seeing well over 30 million people have already voted. We've heard very few problems. People are voting in some places in record numbers, 2 million people in Georgia already. So people should get out there and vote and know they can vote in safety and their vote's going to be counted properly. But where I have concerns is what happens after the polls close. Are some losing candidates going to try to lie to the American people, try to make people think that because ballots are taking a little bit of time to be counted, which is the way it's always been, and it's entirely normal, try to make them think that there's something rigged about the election process and maybe get them enraged and possibly even violent in the aftermath. We have to all be kind of inoculated against those attempts to divide us and to delegitimize the election process.
Let's talk about, the election process itself, because voting patterns shifted in the 2020 election. According to the U.S. Census, about 70% of the more than 150 million votes that were cast before Election Day. So how does this impact the elections? Early voting, mail-in voting, how does it impact election offices and really the election system in general?
Yeah, we saw a really interesting shift in 2020, and it was largely due to the pandemic, but we had over 100 million people vote before Election Day. And so we actually saw the highest turnout in American history, but we did not see high turnout on Election Day itself because most those people had already voted. It was over 60% of all voters voted before Election Day in 2020. In 2022, I think a lot of voters are still going to vote early, either by mail or in person. What some states are seeing right now is that the number of mail votes, the percentage of mail votes, is kind of normalizing, maybe higher than it was in 2018, but not quite as high as it was in 2020. And a lot of people are still taking advantage of early voting. We can expect very likely over 100 million voters to vote overall in this election. We've seen over 30 million vote as we sit here today, still several days before the election. So it's likely we'll be over 100 million and probably close to about 50%, maybe even a little more, voting early.
And there has been a lot of stress added since the 2020 election. You've talked a little bit about it. We've been dealing with a pandemic, inflation, of course, at a 40-year high, and the country still facing a multitude of high-profile issues. How do you think this is going to impact the elections and staffing election offices and polling places?
Yeah, there's no question that if you look at the American people right now, people are on edge. They feel strongly about their politics in many cases, about certain issues. We see kind of sporadic reports of attempts to intimidate voters. I think regardless of what issues are important to you and what party you want to vote for, the process you're going to find if you're a voter is as convenient and familiar and safe as you could possibly imagine. Over 35 states allow easy in-person voting and voting by mail for anybody. Another 11 states make it easy to vote in person early, although you have to have an excuse to request a mail ballot. So many people are already voting in complete safety. It's a convenient and familiar process. Go and vote and find and see that process for yourself. And if you have any questions, the best way to answer those questions in this election might be too late right now, but in future elections, volunteer to be a poll worker. You see it from the inside. You see the checks and balances in place. It's an easy way to recognize that there are people who are trying to make you anxious about this process, and the process is actually extremely secure. And the men and women who run it, the volunteers, the professionals, they're doing a remarkable job in service to our country.
Right. And you had said, David, that some candidates might lie about the election results or the elections in general. How bad do you think things are right now? How bad do you think things will get? And what is the solution? How do you fix something like this?
So I think things could get bad. I'm not predicting they will get bad, but there are places where candidates are running who have made clear they won't accept election results where they don't win. And just think about that for a second. We live in a very closely divided country, a 50-50 country. Democracy means that there are going to be winners and losers, even with narrow margins. There's hardly anyone in this country who hasn't experienced an electoral defeat, a bitter disappointment in the last decade. And yet some people are trying to convince others that unless one side wins, the election is rigged in some way. And that's just the most anti-democratic thing I can imagine. So we're in a very perilous point in time right now. But I am inspired by the professionals who are running elections, Democrats, Republicans, everything in between. I'm inspired by the people who are voting early right now. I'm inspired by law enforcement officials who are trying to hold people to account for inciting violence and for trying to subvert the will of voters. I think a lot of good things are happening right now. And it's really upon us as citizens to take on an active citizenship and be aware that if someone is trying to tell us that an election is rigged because the candidate we voted for lost, they're probably trying to get rich off of that rage that they're creating. They're probably trying to gain some selfish political power, and they're really exploiting our own impatience in the results and our own desire to see our candidates win rather than contributing to our democracy. And that's the reason I have some hope right now that we're going to be able to move past this.
David Becker from the Center for Election Innovation and Research. David, thank you so much for your time today. We absolutely appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you, Veronica.
Straight ahead on Newsy Live, Twitter bracing for another flurry of pink slips as a new report suggests that half of the staff could be fired.